So Greg, welcome.
Thanks, Matt.
In this video, we're calling it the fight. And for those who haven't seen the other videos, I think it's important we do two things. Just kind of recap and also talk about your credentials so they know kind of where you're coming from and why you're talking about leadership and breakthrough and brokenness. So just to give people a little idea about your background, if they don't know, is that you've been a business owner for 30 years. You've owned 20 different businesses, 14 at a time. Pretty intense situations with thousands of employees. Over the course of your career, you've been a donor, you've been on boards, you've always had very interesting hobbies, including be a pilot for 30 years. You've done a lot in your life, and we could talk about how to be successful, how to be a leader, how to generate wealth, and those would be very interesting topics, but that's not why we're here today, is it?
No, well, in a way it is, in a way it isn't. I mean, you know, there's something about generating success that helps you refine what success really is. And that's really the story of my life. How did I actually identify what success would look like for me? And that came for me through brokenness.
Yeah, so up till now in the previous videos, we're now in our third installment of this series. We've been talking about some of the anchors that hold people back or potentially lead them to become broken, non-functioning, and they can't move forward. What were some of those anchors that we talked about?
The anchors that I've experienced and that I believe all businessmen are going to experience, business leaders in general, are what I call the mask, the loop, the fight, and the frame.
And so today we're actually going to talk about the fight. But just to recap on the mask. So the mask is kind of a protective shell that we wear to fit a role. We want to be a good negotiator. We want to be a successful and courageous leader. We want to look like we have wealth, and we're going to live out a script and repeat that script over and over again to make that mask be true. Now, today we want to talk about the fight. And so what is the fight exactly as you would define it, as you've discovered it so far?
You know, Matt, I guess from my boyhood, I always felt like, you know, I was a problem solver. I was one who wanted to meet challenges. I wanted to look for things that needed resolution, and that was like a hungering for me, a pursuit. And even as a boy, I had a cousin who'll probably watch this video one of these days. I had a cousin who was really good at fighting. You know, he was a good fighter. Yeah. And he enjoyed it so much, and it brought so much euphoria and value to him as being this great fighter that he looked for fights. But the problem was he wasn't fighting the right fights. You know, he wasn't the Walker, Texas Ranger defending the people who couldn't defend themselves. He was out there looking for this repeated loop that helped him hold the mask up of who he wanted to be, who he had found acceptance from other people, value that he had found through the fight. And for myself, Matt, I know you asked me for a simple definition, but there's really not a simple definition. You know, I'd spent a lot of time in my life fighting, and I felt good about my ability to do that. But there came a point in time when I decided I just never want to fight again. I had to realize that it wasn't about the fight being bad, it was about fighting the right fight.
Yeah, that's powerful. And you and I have talked about how the negative outcome could be if you're fighting the wrong battle, you end up being the leader at the head of the pack with everyone who's following you on the ground, dead, and all the shrapnels behind you of fighting a battle that ultimately exhausted the resource. So what does it mean when you say fighting a battle on the wrong battlefield?
You know, you gave me a vivid image there of the people following you, you know, all being dead. Why? Because they trusted you to do, you know, to lead, because that's what we are, right? We're leaders and we're talking to leaders. What a graphic way of visualizing it. Because fighting the right fight means asking a lot of questions that sometimes we don't want to ask as leaders. It means facing vulnerability rather than propping up our mask. And when we get into meetings, when we get into leadership situations, it's often a time when we dictate the party line, when we tell people what they should think, and we tell people what we believe reinforces what they should see in us. And you're building this mountain of things that can't stand on their own. They're little fragments of who you are and who you want to be, and you somehow stand back and think that they make a successful leader, and they don't. What I've learned about the fight is that when you are fighting the right fight, people want to follow you. Even people who don't have confidence in their own ability to fight want to become a part of a battle that's actually meaningful. And I've got a few ways that I like to define the right fight versus the wrong fight.
And what are those ways?
Well, for me, as simple as this sounds, if I'm fighting a fight that's defensive, it's probably the wrong fight. You see, when you're protecting your mask, when you're protecting the loops based on circumstantial beliefs that you've developed over the years, when you're always in this protecting mode, it's probably the wrong fight. But the right fight will be a fight that has, number one, a clear view of success. I think back the era of the Vietnam War. We're at war, we're fighting, but nobody knows what success looks like. How many people died in those battles? How much damage was done, and no respect for the process because there was no clear objective to be obtained.
You can't get out.
And you can't get out. You're locked in this battle. You're here. You're doing your time. But when we have clear vision of success, and when we have stripped away the false loops that are in our lives that take us where we've already been, we're recapturing the same hills over and over. We're feeling like, wait a minute, it's the deja vu of leadership, wait a minute, I've been here before. How come I'm here again? When that's what we're experiencing, we know we're not fighting the right fight. The correct fight will be an offensive fight. It will be a fight that has traction, that leads toward a consistency of breakthrough that people want to follow. When I look in the eyes of people who don't even believe that change is possible, it tells me that leadership is lacking. Because when people actually can conceptually believe that they could get traction and that they could change, that the organization could change, and that things don't have to be the way they've always been in this defensive circle the wagons type of mentality, then there's hope. That only begins when the leader chooses and is determined to fight the right fight.
So it explains perfectly what our goal is here, which is if you're fighting the right fight, you're unlocking your purpose. You're living with passion, and you're becoming the leader that you're meant to be. Contrast that, though, with fighting the wrong fight. You've given a great visual for this before, which is to be up on the ladder. You get to the top. Can you share that little analogy?
Well, probably a lot of people have heard this story before, but this idea of, you've reached the top of the ladder, but then you realize it's leaning against the wrong wall. And honestly, that's a feeling I can completely relate to.
But you were in the mask, you're repeating the loop, so you have to convince people we're in the right fight, but they know better, don't they?
Those are the late night questions that kept me awake. I wonder how many leaders would identify with me when I talk about the inability to sleep a lot of hours as a leader who has a lot of responsibility. When I was in the wrong fight, I can tell you that one of the symptoms was 3 to 4 o'clock in the morning, the fight was going on right here, and I couldn't sleep anymore. I thought that was a great thing. I was proud of the fact that I didn't need a lot of sleep. But the reality was there were these circular processes that I had to continue to do battle with and reinforce all the areas where we might be weak, where I might not have put the right persona out there, and I had to be certain. And all of those things kept me. And the worst part of it, Matt, and I talk about this a lot in my book. In fact, this was the recurring question of my life that drove me insane. It was this idea that I might not be who I was created to be. This question that I didn't have an answer for, and it just kept coming up. I saw myself as a warrior, and yet the question continued to be asked in my mind, but am I becoming who I was created to be? It drove me insane. And only after the masks were gone, the loops were destroyed because they were pointless any longer, and that question came to me in the stillness of many, many nights in prison, that I actually found the answers to those questions and realized it was about the fight that I was fighting.
And is that where you start to get led to a new perspective of breakthrough, is when there's only one question to consider, which is, am I becoming the man that God created me to be? Before, it was easy, right? Not easy, but you could repeat the loops, put the mask back on, and forget that question for maybe another 12 hours or 18 hours. And
absolutely.
Many leaders can identify with that. But you've had a unique experience, which is to be forced to think through the answer to that question. And do you feel like that led to your breakthrough?
Yeah, there's no question that it did. I hope I've adequately expressed the despair, the agony, the helplessness of facing that question in the book. I've written a lot about it and tried to share this idea that the only thing in my life that was hard was having free time to think. It's one of the reasons that church was such a troublesome thing for me, because my brain wouldn't shut off, and all of these inconsistencies even, or questions, thoughts about my purpose, about all the things I couldn't answer would just come roaring back in. I needed to be busy. I needed to be fighting a fight, any fight. Give me any fight. I'm born to fight. But I was never fighting the right fight because I'd never asked myself or defined what success looked like. Yeah. And once that changed, which is what changed for me in the quiet, in the I have nothing left to give, nothing left to lose, now what am I going to do? Have you ever heard anybody ask the question, well, what if money was no object? What if you could do anything you wanted in life and it wasn't about, well, that's like, I always thought, what a dumb question, because money is what matters. We have to, we only have validity in how we're going to score the game. But what I learned from all of that is if you're fighting the right fight, money, influence, true satisfaction, true peace are not a problem.
Yeah. So the only problem with this is maybe there's leaders watching this right now, Christian businessmen and leaders who are engaged in a current fight, and you can identify with the idea that when you're in the fight, even if it's the wrong fight, it feels like there's no other place to go. That loop that we go through, how do we get out? But if you could just convey a little bit, what's possible on the other side of just asking yourself the right question, defining success, and getting off the wrong fight onto the right fight, having a breakthrough, to be honest? What's possible? Could you paint that picture?
Yeah, what's possible, Matt, is to place new values on everything. First of all, to identify the purpose for the current fight. Sometimes I found that I was engaged in a battle I didn't choose, but I felt obligated to fight it. In fact, often I didn't even realize that I was in the fight. It was so much a part of just my daily routine, my nature. This was the warfare that I just thought it's a given. But asking the right questions, opening myself up to a new awareness, that could only happen outside of the fight. I mean, this isn't an aha moment. It isn't for me, I had nuclear explosion that basically forced me to ask and evaluate these questions. I hope, and it's the goal of my book, and you know that's how I'm discussing this entire perspective, is to help people avoid the nuclear fallout and to be able to stop, set aside, and make change. But the reality is, change is a fight. And until we're willing to transfer the energy, the emotion, the focus of that battle onto something that has traction, which is change. If we aren't willing to do that, we're never going to fight the right fight. And I don't want to just keep talking here, but what comes clearly to my mind is people who will tell me, well, I want you to share with me how to get breakthrough. But, I don't want to take anything away from these other areas of my life. I only have like 10 minutes a day I could maybe devote to doing this, Then I realize, we're not on the same page. The things that we want from life are not money. Money theoretically brings us a degree of satisfaction. It brings us a degree of accomplishment, of peace, theoretically. But if we pursue money for the purpose of that, we are not only fighting the wrong fight, we're headed toward a cliff. We are headed to brokenness, destruction. It is inevitable. It will happen. So the only thing I can say about people who, want to know, well, how do I know if I'm fighting the right fight? I guarantee you, if you're fighting a defensive battle without clear vision, without a clear destination and the knowledge of what success feels like, then you're fighting the wrong fight.
Yeah. So one other anchor that we might have besides the mask, the loop, the fight, is also the frame. And that plays a big part in how we're able to see the world and even what's happening or being on the right battlefield. We're going to talk about that in the next video. Right. But give us just a little taste of what does it mean to have the frame holding you back as a leader?
The view we have of ourselves and our lives, have you ever found yourself defaulting to a statement like, well, that's just who I am. Yeah. That's who I am. That's how I am. That's what I am. These are all the things that define the frame that we're looking through. I love that commercial on TV. I don't even know, it's some bank or something where the actor in the commercial is holding up this frame and looking out at life, and he sees it through the image of this frame. But guess what? On the outside of that frame, it's all old. It's all the old stuff. It's limited to the frame that he's looking through, and our entire lives are limited to the frame that we're looking through, and that's what I want to talk about.
Well, I'm excited about that next video. Thanks for sharing with us today, Greg.
Thanks, Matt.
And thanks for joining us in this breakthrough leadership video. We'll see you in the next one.